Good morning. Good morning. Welcome. Welcome this morning. Thanks for being here with us. We are glad you're here. We'll give a few seconds here for the participant numbers to creep up as you all are coming in, as they're let everybody in. Good morning, Annette. Thank you for being here with us today. We are glad you're here, and we are excited to have so many people from all over the world. We've got folks from Europe. We've got at least one from Belize. I'm sure there's others from Central and South America and the islands around us, from the West Coast. You are up early if you are on the West Coast. Thanks for being here with us this morning. Hi, Sharima. Great to have you here with us. We're going to get started in about 30 seconds, just to give you a heads up as to the order of events. Hello, Cecily Cooper. Thanks for being here with us today. Gloria, thanks for being here with us. Well, good morning or good afternoon. It could be good evening. It could be early morning. We're thrilled that you are here to join us for the 9th, or is this now the 10th, annual Leadership Research Colloquium. We are thrilled to be hosting this event. We had this crazy idea quite a long time ago that what if we were to bring in an accessible way the very best of what's happening in leadership research to our broader audience. And so that includes professors. We've got PhD students, we've got undergrads here with us today, and we have many folks from the community who maybe are somehow connected with FAU, many of whom are not. So we're glad you're here, and we want this time to be valuable for you. So we're going to be having 2 presentations, but there's also going to be some discussion. Feel free to type in the chat. We'll be monitoring the chat, and we're looking forward to a robust conversation. And you have the distinct opportunity where I'm pleased that we have 2 fantastic, phenomenal, world-class scholars here with us today. Dr. Ani Ma, hello, Ani, and Dr. Sibel Ozgen.
Hello.
Good morning. Good morning. I will introduce each of them here in a moment, but let me just tell you really quickly, in case some of you, this is the first time that you've ever been to a center event. Maybe just hit us up in the chat if this is the first time. Let us know if this is the first time you've ever been to a center event. Just want to say really briefly about what we do at the center. We do 3 things really at the center. We do engagement events, where we offer things to the community that are typically free of charge, that help solidify what we do in the community, and that's really the global community, but also the local community. We do research, we sponsor research, which is part of why we are here today, and there's a number of ways that comes out. And then we also do developmental programming. We know, and we have seen for years and years now, that small adjustments that are research backed can make leaders significantly better when they figure out how to do them just a little bit different. So we know the nexus of leadership and leadership development is, how do you make it a practice, and how do you get just a little bit better at it every day by making small adjustments? And boy, have we ever seen the impact over the years. Over 4,000 leaders have come through our programs over the last 12 years, and we're really privileged to have this to have this audience. So without further ado, great, Annette, we're glad this is your first time. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Ani Ma. She is an assistant professor at Tulane University. She received her PhD from Duke, from the Fuqua School of Business at Duke University. And there is a distinct reason why she is also here with us today. She is the 2020 winner of the Alva Chapman Outstanding Dissertation Award. This award is given in partnership with the Network of Leadership Scholars of the Academy of Management, and we solicit dissertation applications for dissertations from all over the world, and just have had phenomenal, we get a phenomenal list of dissertations every year, and an international committee of well-known scholars helps us adjudicate this. And Dr. Ma was the winner from last year, and we're thrilled to have her presenting some of the work that's related to her dissertation that won this award here today. And you saw she held up the award too. So we haven't been able to ceremonially hand it to her in person. So this is the closest we're going to get for now, at least. Dr. Ma, I'm going to hand it over to you to walk us through some of the work that you're doing around the ADA model. So you can inform us a little bit around what that means in the context of leadership and leadership and gender. Really fascinating stuff. Thanks for being here with us today. The floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Nathan. I'm so delighted and honored to have received the award. I'm really excited to share with you some of my research findings. It's now called the CADIS model just because of how the review process is. So I'm gonna share my screen now and let me know if it works. All good? Okay.
Great.
Great. So before I start, I just want to share a personal story about myself. So I am originally from Singapore. And as you can see here on the world map, Singapore is represented by that very little dot. And a few years ago, I traveled to I wanted to come to the US to start graduate programs. So I began to receive all these interviews and I was really excited. So I asked my then advisor, hey, how do I excel in these interviews? And he gave me a piece of advice that was very memorable. He said, Ani, you have to show the interviewers that you're very competent, that you're very independent, and you're a hard worker. You have to be very agentic. So agency basically means showing these qualities of competence, independence, and hardworkingness, right? You have to be so agentic to the point of being dominant. Now that really got me thinking. I agree that being competent, independent, and being hardworking are good things, good qualities to have. But do I have to be dominant? Is being dominant beneficial for women? Is it even beneficial for men? And so here are some of the questions that I want to unpack in today's talk. Unraveling the gender double bind using the CADIS model of agency. So I first start with the observation that women leaders are still significantly underrepresented in the world and also within the US. So today, 8% of national leaders are women, 5% of Fortune 500 CEOs are women, 10% of the patent inventors in the United States are women, and 27% of the tenured faculty in the US are women. So why are women still underrepresented? Now, there might be lots of reasons why this might be the case, but according to gender and leadership and stereotyping researchers, one reason is because of how women are seen in terms of their agency. So agency refers to whether someone is seen as ambitious, self-confident, independent, hardworking, and competent, and so forth. And it's also positively associated with leadership outcomes. So if someone has these qualities, they're much more likely to be selected as leaders, and people are also more likely to say that they are good leaders. However, agency within the context of women,
Ani, can I interrupt just for a second? Are you advancing the slide? It's only showing the first slide. I just want to make sure that there's not a technical glitch here. There we go.
Okay.
I think can everyone see that? Thank you, Sarah, for that. Yep.
Okay. I'm gonna start from this slide then, right? So, however, for women, we came to two rather contradictory conclusions. So it turns out that for women are perceived. The first conclusion is that women are perceived to lack sufficient agency needed for leadership roles. So relative to men, women are seen as less competent, independent, self-confident, and so forth. But then when they have agency, when they possess perceptions of competence, hardworkingness, and independence, they are then somehow penalized. So people don't like them and they don't want to hire them. You can think of popular conceptions of female leaders as being somewhat bossy in nature, right? People don't like them. And when you think about these two conclusions together, it is somewhat, there's somewhat of a tension here because it suggests that women can be disadvantaged in terms of being perceived as lacking in agency. But then when they are perceived to have agency, they are then punished, they are penalized. So why might this be the case? Again, there might be lots of reasons why this could be the case, but one reason is because it is unclear what agency even means in the literature. And so here's how agency has been defined in the research. Agency is defined as being assertive, being controlling, being confident, being aggressive, being ambitious, being dominant, being forceful, being independent, being self-sufficient, being self-confident, and prone to act as a leader. Now, intuitively, one might think someone who is assertive, they need not be independent. And similarly, someone who is self-confident, they need not be ambitious. So what really is agency? And to find out, I conducted a literature review of all the papers that have looked at this, that's conceptually relevant to agency and also within about gender and leadership. And in total, I found over 1,000 papers that have looked at this topic. Not all these papers measured agency in a specific way. Only 63 papers measured agency in their work. And all of these 63 papers, I found that 148 different skill items have been used to measure agency. This means that researchers have been referring to the same idea in 148 different ways. So here is a word cloud of what agency is. So to be agentic is also to be seen as dominant, to be seen as confident, to be seen as competitive, to be seen as competent, to be seen as having leadership qualities, to be seen as active, competitive, and so forth. Now, this seems like a lot of different qualities. So how can we distill it in broad and major themes? So to do so, we conducted a factor analysis. It's a method in psychometrics. And first, we collected data from full-time workers. So we asked them, to what extent do you agree that your supervisor is dominant, is ambitious, is power-seeking, is dominant, and so forth. And then we applied factor analysis techniques. And here are the 6 factors of agency. So first, we have competent agency, which captures whether someone is seen as intelligent, capable, competent, skillful, and masterful. We have ambitious agency, which captures whether someone is seen as status-seeking, aspire to be leader, whether he or she is ambitious. We have dominant agency, which captures whether someone is seen as aggressive, manipulative, controlling. We have diligent agency, which reflects whether someone is seen as dedicated, active, task-oriented. And we have independent agency, which captures whether someone is seen as self-directed, individualistic, self-reliant. And finally, we have self-assured agency, which reflects whether someone is seen as having conviction, whether he or she is self-efficacious, willing to take a stand on some issues, and so forth. Okay, so now you might ask me, well, that's great that now we know what agency is, but why should we use this model of agency? And so with this new CADIS model of agency, I wanted to ask the slightly perhaps provocative question of, can women be rewarded for agency? To answer this question, I recruited over 1,000 full-time and part-time workers. And first I asked them, again, to what extent do you agree that your current supervisor is competent, ambitious, dominant, using the skill that I have just developed? And then I collected information on their supervisor's gender. So as you can see here, that's a fairly even split. As the outcome variable, I measured how effective they think that their supervisors are. So this is a scale that has been used in previous research. It's about whether they think that their supervisors have good planning ability, whether they are able to set direction, whether they have ability to communicate, and overall whether they think that their supervisor is a good leader. Now for results. Here we see something that the results that confirms our intuition about the gender double bind. So here we have results for dominant agency. So these are perceptions about whether the workers think that their supervisors are manipulative, aggressive, dominant, forceful, and controlling. So on the x-axis here, we have dominant agency. From left to right, we can see that these are increasing perceptions of dominance. On the y-axis, we have perceptions of leader effectiveness. So here we have leaders who are not seen as very effective. Here we have leaders, on top of the slide, we have leaders who are seen as extremely effective. And we also have two lines, yellow lines and a yellow line and a green line. So there they represent whether the supervisor was a male or a female leader. So we see that both the yellow and the green line are significantly downward sloping. What this means is that the more men and women are seen as dominant, the less effective they are. So it doesn't benefit both men and women to be seen as dominant, forceful, or manipulative. But we also see that the green line for female supervisors is actually significantly steeper in a negative way compared to the yellow line, which means that women are penalized to a greater extent as they display greater perceptions of dominance. And at high levels of perceptions of dominant agency, we see that the green line is lower than the yellow line, which means that women are seen as significantly less effective than men. So highly dominant women seen as significantly less effective than highly dominant men. And at low levels of dominance, women who are low in dominance are seen as more effective than men who are low in dominance. So this is consistent with what we know about the gender double bind, because it says that women who show agency, dominant agency here, are seen as significantly less effective than men who show the same levels of dominant agency. But now we see a pattern of results for competent, diligent, and independent agency. They are significantly different from what we've seen from dominant agency. So here we have perceptions of competent, diligent, and independent agency. And we see here, again, on the y-axis, we have leader effectiveness. And we see here that both the yellow line and green line have significantly positive slopes. So what this means is that both men and women, as they demonstrate greater levels of competence, diligence, and independence, they are both seen as significantly more effective. So it benefits both men and women to show that they are competent, diligent, and independent. But we also see that women, the green slopes for women supervisors are significantly steeper than the yellow slopes, which means that women are rewarded to a greater degree than men are for demonstrating these qualities of competence, diligence, and independence. Again, also at high levels of perceived competence, diligence, and independence, women are seen as significantly more effective than men. So highly competent, diligent, and independent women are seen as significantly more effective than men who possess the same level of competence, diligence, and independence. And again, at low levels of competence, diligence, and independence, men are seen as more effective. So what do all these findings mean, right? So in sum, according to the gender double bind, when women leaders are perceived to possess agency, they are penalized. But with this new model of agency, I show that only perceptions of dominant agency drive this punishment towards agentic women. In fact, I come to a different conclusion. Women can be rewarded for possessing agency. Highly competent, independent, and hardworking women can be seen as even more effective than men are. So with that, I would like to close my presentation. I'm looking forward to the conversation later, but if there are any questions that we were not able to cover, please feel free to email me at this email address. Thank you.
Yeah. Ani, this is fantastic. And it's great to see how this research has developed. I think since the last version that we saw, which would have been a little bit of time ago, really interesting. So I keep thinking about some of these popular press, and we can have a time to discuss this a little more after, but just I want to make sure everyone is that we're all understanding, make sure I'm understanding and everyone else too, what it is, sort of what some of the takeaways of what you're saying. You know, there's this popular press about the double bind, meaning that, you know, you have to be competent and warm at the same time, or that you're punished for being, you know, a certain kind of person. That we know that this gets labeled oftentimes when women are too assertive or something like that. What's fascinating then to me, if I'm taking this away correctly, so is that it's really being driven, the punishment is being driven by dominance, but if we think of agency more broadly, the competence, the independence, and the diligence are actually positive, and potentially even more positive for women than they are for men. So those parts of agency are there's not a double bind, and in fact it maybe even tips the other way a little bit. What would you say to that?
Right, exactly. So in fact, what we are showing is that perceptions of dominance, they don't even benefit men, right? So we see that dominant men, they're seen as less effective than men who are not dominant. So I think this really changes a fair bit of what we know about the gender double bind. I think the trick here, though, is that we look at the realm of perception. So after these perceptions have been formed, and it's also possible that it's much easier for women to trigger these perceptions of dominance than men are.
Yeah.
So if I
Right.
stare at you, Nathan,
Right.
maybe you'll be more likely to think that I'm being dominant than if a man engage in the same behavior. So this is a really important question that we are looking at in future research projects.
Yeah.
And yes, so our finding suggests that it's actually really beneficial for women leaders to show that they're very competent, independent, and diligent. So now the question is what are the behaviors that lead to this perception?
Yeah, and I think it's so important because understanding where the potential punishment is, right? I mean, what specific mechanism is occurring is really important, because if you're going to do something about it, you need to be able to act sort of on the right mechanism, right? And so that's what I think is really important and powerful, and that's a great bridge to our next presentation, where Sibel is going to be kind of highlighting some of this as well. But the point applies to all of this, is that sometimes one of the things we don't know, like no single study is perfect. That's why we have to sort of build on things and look at a series of imperfect studies to get a better picture. Is that one of the things that is not controlled for in this, and it's not a criticism of your study, just like you can only do so much in one study, that the same behaviors are exhibited by a man and a woman might be interpreted. So the point at which you be seen as competent and diligent is a little bit different, right? So where that is, but thank you for that. And I look forward to a really interesting discussion. So shoot us some questions here as well. I see some already coming up. So with that, I would like to introduce Dr. Sibel Ozgen, who is a current PhD student in the Department of Global Leadership and Management at FIU. So you may ask, why is she a current PhD student? And I refer to her as Dr. Ozgen. That's because she already has a PhD in engineering. And so she is in the very tail end of completing her dissertation in the College of Business, and is on the job market right now, and has been and sort of just about to launch a very successful career. And we're thrilled that she's here with us today. So she is a polyglot and a linguist extraordinaire. She speaks 5 languages, 4 fluently, right? Which has been very helpful in a paper that we did a number of years ago coding articles in different languages where we showed something that actually builds on Dr. Ma's research around this sort of dominance or sort of assertiveness being a negative, like a strong form of assertiveness being a negative for men too, even in countries where it's normal. Even in countries where that's a more of a normal behavior, the actual outcomes, if you're a leader and you do that, it doesn't work. So it might be normal, but it's not effective. And so Sibel was instrumental in that. So with that, Dr. Ozgen, take it away.
Thank you, Nathan, for this nice introduction. Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. And I will start sharing my screen. And today's presentation is very related to Dr. Ma's presentation in the sense that we will look at how individuals are selected to top leadership positions and how decision makers view such behaviors, such as being arrogant or such as these behaviors that might have a negative connotation that might seem as red flags. As Dr. Ma mentioned, when we look at top leadership positions, which we often see something like this. These are the top 100 CEOs that have been identified by Harvard Business Review as world's best performing CEOs. And what we see is that there are only 3 female CEOs. And women continue to hold less than 10% of CEO positions and less than 1/3 of C-suite positions, not only in the United States, but across the globe. And that's the reason why does this happen? Well, there are different explanations which we can group under 2 broad categories. That's supply side, which means that there might be gender differences in terms of human capital allocation, motivation, and that might explain the differences. But this suggests that if women and men have similar and comparable qualifications, then they should have similar outcomes. But the arguments on the demand side, which means that the arguments on the decision makers side suggest that when men and women have similar qualifications, they don't obtain similar outcomes such as compensation or promotion.
Are you seeing, Isabel, are you seeing the piece on your screen? I'm not sure if everyone is seeing, like looks like there's a remnant. Maybe Alec can help us out. Oh, okay, there, it just went away. So I'm not sure if everyone else was seeing that as well. Thank you.
So what happens is that it might be because gatekeepers, decision makers have preferences, which means that one of these barriers is that double standards, which means that women need to provide more evidence to be seen as promotable to top management positions. But we really don't know much about this because we don't know how decision makers make promotion decisions. We don't know how the double standards work in the real life, because most of these studies are conducted in the laboratory. There is nothing wrong with lab studies, but it's very difficult to understand what really happens in the world and in real life if we don't have answers from executives. And most of these studies have been conducted in the United States, which means that we really don't understand what type of double standards, if any, women face across different countries. Is it the same? Is it different? So we don't know many things. And the approach taken in this study is that—
Isabel, can MTS is asking, can you stop sharing and resharing, because that remnant is still showing up, so we can't see the full slides. Maybe that'll help. Sorry for interrupting. Yeah.
Oh, no, of course. Let me try. Is it better?
It looks like it for now, yeah.
Okay, thank you. What we argue in this paper is that the top leadership positions and compositions are determined earlier in the process when decision makers start to look and decide who is suitable for these positions. And when they are considering candidates, they look at problematic behaviors, red flags, such as being arrogant, dominant, and eliminate candidates based on this information. But what we really don't know whether certain categories of executives are discounted more in the presence of negative signals. imperfections. And this is important because not all of us are perfect. We all have some imperfections, but we don't know whether some executives have more forgiveness or have more leeway, demonstrating some imperfections and still being seen as suitable for top leadership positions. And in real life, how this would look like is, this is an example which is a book about why so many incompetent men become leaders. I'm not going to suggest that the sample that we have here is about incompetent men, but it might be the idea that the double standard is not in the quantity or type of positive information we expect to have from executives, but it might be that we are more forgiving towards a certain group of executives when they show imperfections. And how do we understand this? So to test this idea, we are using field data, which means that this is not a lab design. This data comes from executives who work in organizations, in different industries, and the data comes from two different sources. There are 490 executives, and the supervising executives of these target executives provided information about whether they were seeing these executives as promotable to top management positions. The subordinates and peers of these focal executives provided information about whether they were seeing imperfections, negative signals in 4 domains that have been identified in prior literature as imperfections or behavioral patterns that do not allow individuals to be maximally effective, such as being arrogant, not being good at building teams, not being able to adapt to situations, top management team, or not being able to take feedback, and failure to meet business objectives. And the sample here we have comes from 18 different countries because promotion norms differ from one country to another. And some countries place emphasis on merit for promotion to top management positions, whereas some other countries emphasize relational ties for promotion to top management positions too. And in this study, we have 8 executives coming from 18 different countries, and I used a different data set to determine whether these countries were more based on merit or relational ties to make promotion decisions. And we used a fuzzy set qualitative comparative analysis to find out whether certain group of executives face harder time if they exhibit imperfections and to be seen as promotable. So what do the results say? When are women considered promotable? The good news is that women can be seen as promotable, but only when they don't have imperfections. But when they have imperfections, negative cue signals, men are considered promotable to top management positions, but women are not. And the extent to which men can show these imperfections and still be considered to top management positions depend on the institutional context and whether these contexts emphasize merit or relational ties for promotion. So the findings look something like this. Here, highlighted in blue are our negative signal dimensions, red flags, if you will, negative cues. And the first, here we will see what type of executives are seen as promotable to top. And the first one here, highlighted in blue, shows when a double standard does not happen. It doesn't happen because this configuration, this pathway is available for both men and women and across institutional environments. And what this suggests is that when executives do not have imperfections, negative cues across 4 different dimensions, they are seen as promotable, which means that no imperfections, so they are seen as promotable. And this is the end of the good news for women executives, because what comes next is that the other 3 configurations are available only for male executives. So if we look at configuration 2, it suggests that when men don't have imperfections in building a team, in adopting and meeting business objectives, they are seen as promotable. And it doesn't matter whether they have problems in interpersonal relationships, such as if they are arrogant or if they are hurting people, it doesn't matter as long as they do not show negative signals in other 3 domains. Configuration 3 is similar, which suggests again that if men don't have problems in dimension 1, dimension 3, and dimension 4, they are still seen as promotable, and it doesn't matter whether they show a negative cue or imperfections in building a team. So this configuration 4, also suggests that in the absence of negative cues in dimension 1, dimension 2, and dimension 3, men are seen as promotable, regardless of whether they have problems in meeting business objectives. And the last configuration is the context-dependent configuration, which is a pathway to promotion that is available for male executives based in institutional environments that emphasize relational ties for promotion to top management positions. And what this suggests is that being a male in these environments might be sufficient to be considered to top management positions, and whether or not they show imperfections or negative cues may not matter. So all in all, the findings, and also findings, when we look at the sufficient configurations, we see that of the 5 configurations, 4 of them emphasize the absence of negative cues in the adaptability dimension, suggesting that for executives to be considered promotable to top management positions, they might be able to take feedback and learn and be able to adapt to the culture of the organization and the top management team. All in all, the findings suggest that women have a narrower pathway to be seen as promotable to top management positions, which consists of being perfect, having no imperfections. On the other hand, male can still be seen as promotable to top management positions, even if they have negative cues, and they might have more leniency to show these negative cues. The findings contribute to an understanding. We understand when gender may or may not matter for promotability in organizations, depending on the imperfections that are displayed by the executives. And it also helps us to show how decision makers' perception of the candidates may eventually shape the top management team composition. And we also see that even in meritocratic context, gender double standards continue to persist if when female executives exhibit imperfections. And this research also contributes to this emerging research on negative work events, which suggests that there are gender differences when negative things happen at work. When similar mistakes or errors happen, women are punished more than men. And the practical implications is that one of the things that we see in the literature is whether women lean out from executive positions. And it might be that women just don't lack the motivation to pursue executive positions, but they might be steering away from these positions if they see that they are similar, but are not being promoted to top management positions in their organizations. Also, the pipeline will become smaller if at each stage organizations are promoting only female executives who are only perfect, who don't have imperfections. And finally, we have a very limited understanding of how decision makers make promotion decisions, and we need to be cognizant of the fact that we might be allowing imperfections differently for different categories of executives, and we might need to take into account whether we are paying the same attention when people and executives or leaders show imperfections and negative cues in their work time. So that would be all. I'm ready to have the questions.
That's great. Well, so in the spirit of sort of doing something similar that we did with Dr. Ma when she finished, if I can, tell me if I'm getting this right. Now I'm a little bit, I'm an insider on this one because have been involved a little bit, but you've of course been living this much more than I. So when it comes to senior executive promotion, that is still where there is a large gap, right? So when you talk about senior executive, even in the United States, it's about what, 28% of senior executives are women, and we actually have a number of them on this webcast here today, some of whom have made it all the way to the top. I wish we could bring them in. I wish there was an easy way to bring them in. We'll have to do that maybe at another point in time. So the idea that this is based on is that maybe it's not just how good you are, it's do you have any flaws? Like we've all got flaws, right? I mean, we've all got kind of imperfections. And do flaws matter more for women? Are women punished matter more for? So what's the answer to that?
Yeah, it matters. What it matters is that women, to be seen as promotable or suitable to top leadership positions, they should not have imperfections.
Okay, so there's no tolerance except for women being perfect.
Yes.
To be seen as promotable, which I think in some ways, a lot of people will say, well, that's kind of not surprising, right? What would you say to that? I mean, what is this just confirming what we already know, or what does this study tell us that's different or new?
So one of the interesting thing about this study is that often we don't understand how women reach the top level leadership positions. Some women reach, some other women don't reach. What is the difference? Is it gender? Is it just the gender? But what we see here is that it's not the gender, but it's also how decision makers look at and evaluate the person's the imperfections. It's not the same. It's not evaluated in the same way. It's not the same behavior might not be seen as suitable for top management positions, such as being, for instance, arrogant. If a man does it, they might get away with it, but women executives cannot. And it's not just about the more positive information. It's about what we allow in terms of imperfections to be able to reach to top level leadership.
I think one of the things that's interesting to me about this too is that this is actually saying, but the flaw of not being able to deal with change and not being adaptable is a killer even for men.
Yes.
So, I mean, that's kind of interesting, right? So, I mean, it's a killer for women, as are any of the other things that we looked at, but that one is a killer for men across all contexts. So what was the predominant way though to get ahead for men and women? Was there what was the predominant pathway?
The predominant pathway is, of course, not to have any imperfection.
Okay, so for both men and women, the most surefire way to get promoted is to actually be. So that's in some ways that's good, right? I mean, it would be horrible if like the best way to get promoted is to be really bad at what you know, sort of have all these. Okay, great. So I have a question for both you and Dr. Ma. And please, I've been seeing a few questions, and I think there's a few others. But what would you say to someone? I'm going to read it here. Based off your research, what advice would you give to up and coming leaders? What would you say to them? And I guess you could start with women, but maybe it also is to men as well, because this, you know, oftentimes there's implications for both. So.
Maybe I could go first. Okay. Well, I think the clear implication from my research is to show independence, diligence, and confidence, and for both men and women to avoid being seen as overly aggressive, dominant, and forceful.
Sibel?
It's related to what Dr. Ma suggests, is that striving for perfection and not having negative cues are important, but also it's important for female executives not to steer away while they are developing and to persist in their pathway. And it's also important for male executives or decision makers to think about how they are evaluating, and female executives to how we are evaluating individuals when we see similar patterns of behaviors. Are we more forgiving, or are we discounting some leaders more than the others? And it's also important for the leaders to make this understanding that we are evaluating executives in the similar way.
Yeah, and I think that's there's, both of you raised a really interesting point. I mean, which is, sort of this broader discussion around some of this work has implications for what, one of the ways this can be thought of is how women manage impressions. And that's that's exactly what you were getting at. But, it's interesting because, and I think you would probably agree, and you might have some nuance to this, is that that's not fair for that, if that's the only focus, right? And that isn't what you're focused on. I'm just saying, of like, there's sort of there's one sort of stream of thought of like, here's what you can do as a woman to sort of avoid all of these things, but it's putting all of the task on the person who's experiencing the difficulty, which is crazy, right? So we need to be thinking about systems and thinking about the people making the evaluations and how we set this up, because it's not your fault if you're, it's like blaming the victim almost, right? There's a little bit of that going on. So I think there's something really important about this idea that we think about the system in which it's and who is doing the evaluation. Are we asking questions? Are we discounting a group of senior executives? Are they discounting a female candidate because they're being more critical of a potential flaw? And being aware of this, right, might be able to help say, look, are we treating them, are we evaluating them the same? And I think there's a lot of examples of how women are sometimes punished more, but this has never been looked at in the context of senior executive promotion with a real life sample of people from across the world. And I think that's what's really interesting. And so, Ani, what would you, where are you going with this next? Your research, or what is this? I mean, what does this kind of look like? And you touched on that a little bit in your presentation, but what does this look like?
Right. So I think one of the questions I think in the chat mentioned, right? So how can we actually increase women's, how women, both men and women are perceived in terms of their independent, diligent, and competent agency? And so this is where we're going next. So the specific behaviors that women can do, and both men and women can do this in order to increase other people's perceptions of their competence, diligence, and independence. And of course, as you brought up a really good point, right? This is kind of like putting the burden on women, and this is like, to what extent should we put a burden on people who are already disadvantaged in some way? So we are also thinking of ways that managers can try to address, or try to elicit more of independence, competence, and diligent agency, as opposed, and downplay perceptions of men and women's dominant agency, perhaps by reframing certain behaviors as, oh, maybe persistent eye contact could be showing confidence as opposed to dominant, right? So managers in that way can control the narrative, and that could help elicit more agentic advantages for women and downplay some of the penalties that they might experience for enacting certain behaviors.
So can I follow up on that? We have a question from Daniela Pierre. Hello, Daniela. I hope you're doing well. Does race or cultural norms impact or trigger, this is a broad question, impact or trigger leadership agency in women?
Yeah, that's such an important question, because women is such a broad category. There's so much heterogeneity and diversity within the category of women. So there's some really fascinating research by Ashley Rosette and colleagues at Duke University showing that race totally matters. So for instance, there's some research showing that dominant women experience less of a dominant Black women actually experience less of a penalty when they show that they're aggressive, forceful, because of cultural stereotypes about Black women as the angry Black woman. So people almost sort of assimilate those behaviors to that particular stereotype, and when they see an angry Black woman, they are like, oh, okay, that makes sense. This is kind of troubling in some ways, but it's really fascinating research. And my colleagues and I are also looking at whether, because Asian women are seen typically in the US, they tend to be seen as less, more passive, nicer, more agreeable. So when they display dominant behaviors, people then penalize even more there because they are violating the norms for them to a greater degree than, say, women of other races. So I think, yeah, so it's a really wonderful question. And I think there's a lot of research to be done at the intersection of race and gender as it relates to agency.
Really interesting. So Sibel, where do you go next? As we're closing up here in about 3 or 4 more minutes here, where are you going next with this research?
With this research, I'm going towards decision makers and how we can hopefully prevent these biases, and I am integrating advanced research technologies to see if we were able to use advanced technologies which are taught to eliminate biases. Would we be able to eliminate subsequent biases in the evaluation of these executives? And by these technologies, I mean artificial intelligence, such advanced technologies, whether we can assist decision makers and what this looks like in the future. This is
and will people be willing to accept it? It's coming already right now. It's here, right?
It's here.
So it is here, and it's probably going to become here even more. Can it help? Is it make it worse? Will decision makers go along with it? What is that? Yeah, I think it's really fascinating where you're taking this work. I see a comment here from Joanna. Thank you for this about, she mentioned something. She watched a great video on YouTube from The Take about this. If you happen to have that link, can you drop it in the chat for us, for everyone to see? If you can happen to find it, that'd be great for us to share out to everyone. I'm seeing a lot of great other comments and questions here as well. So last closing thoughts. What say you, both of you? I'll let you take that any direction you want. Don't make me jump in.
I'll say, okay, I think it's very important as leaders that how we evaluate others and how we approach ourselves as well. This is important for leadership development, and we need to be very cognizant of how we look and approach and evaluate others, whether it's similar or different ways. We just need to be mindful, and we need to keep pushing hard and working hard, also doing the good thing.
I would say that some types of agency are good and other types of agency are bad for women leaders. Be more competent, diligent, and independent at work.
Thank you both for being here with us today. And thank you to all of the people who are here, who are attending. It never ceases to amaze us at the center that we have such great folks within our orbit. And also that includes both folks who show up and are engaged, and also both academics and real life senior executives, all the way down to frontline leaders, and have a chance to work with all of them. But you've just heard from 2 world-class scholars around who are really investigating this and not just saying, oh, here's here's a finding, it's exactly what you would expect, and getting into the nuance of it so we can think about action, right? And that's really where the key is in this, and where a lot of research is being done, and a lot of research attention is, okay, how do we understand this better so we can do something about it? And if you look across the arc of the last 10, 20, 30 years, there are so many phenomena across leadership, across the broad category of leadership, across so many things in the social science that we know that we didn't know 10 and 20 years ago and 30 years ago. So sometimes it's easy to sort of think that, wow, this is all, because it plods along at an incremental pace, and it seems sort of slow if you take any one slice of it. But what to me is so exciting is that this is usable. This is like that when we think about social science research in the area of leadership, it's usable, it's real, and it can have deliver a significant impact, especially when we put it all together. So thank you for giving us a window into what some of those slices are that you are both working on. And thank you all for joining us today. I have to give a shout out, or I have to give a plug. If you're not following us at the center, you can follow us. We're on Instagram. We're on LinkedIn is our primary channel, but we through all other things. And so we love to have you here anytime we have any of these events. So please feel free to join us, look into any of our programs. But thank you for being a part of this here today. And thank you again to Dr. Ozgen and Dr. Ma, and congratulations on your outstanding dissertation award from last year that we're now able to present to you virtually. Thanks again, all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.